Well, hello and welcome back to RADTV UK. This is our third section of today's programme, and I'm just running through some of the news reports that I've been looking at, which you may not have noticed. Item 1, US heads towards legal marijuana, fully legal marijuana. There's an AP report about this, Associated Press report. We all know, or many people know, that 2 American states voted to fully legalise marijuana. So not just decriminalise, but legalise the sale, the production, the trafficking of marijuana. However, the federal law still states that marijuana is illegal, and it was widely expected that these votes in Colorado and Washington would be largely symbolic, because the feds would go in and destroy the marijuana fields which are now being grown as we speak. Well, the news is, the surprise is, that the Department of Justice has issued a memorandum which effectively says that they will not interfere so long as minors are not exposed to the drug and so long as the money made from it doesn't find its way back to organised crime. So we now have fully legal marijuana, in the first country in the world to fully legalise it, as far as I know. Certainly it's not fully legal in Holland, it's only decriminalised. It was decriminalised in California, but not fully legal. So the first country to legalise marijuana is ironically the first country that made it illegal in the 1920s. It's worth bearing in mind that there are different aspects to the marijuana question. There's medical marijuana, there's recreational marijuana, and there's industrial hemp. Now, as well as medical marijuana has been tolerated and semi-legal in many American states for many years now, but what's new also is industrial hemp is now shaping up to be a major industry. Serious heavyweight US senators, no doubt perhaps following the money, are seeing the benefits to their states, particularly in Kansas, which used to grow a lot of tobacco, still does. But tobacco is getting a bit out of fashion, understandably, rightly so. And so they're now looking, ironically, to replace it by what some people would call marijuana. It's not marijuana, it's zero potency. But who's to tell a high potency marijuana plant in the middle of an industrial hemp plantation? Industrial hemp is almost a God-given, it's proponents say is almost a God-given thing. Hemp is one of the fastest growing plants in the world. It produces massive amounts of fibre, which can then be used as building material. It captures carbon out of the atmosphere, and it produces omega-3 oils. You can drink hemp milk. I do. It's tasty, and it's supposed to be a lot better for you than dairy, and it's got lots of omega-3 oils in it. So it looks as if marijuana is, after 100 years out in the cold, is set to make a big time comeback as we face the risk of global warming and the need for cheap building materials and for nutritious oil in our milk and our salads. Well, now on a gloomier note, we've got the issue, or the putative issue, of death squads in the United States. Not so surprising in a way, a priori, if there were. America is well known to have supported death squads as a means of political control in Latin America. Some people would call the Syrian rebels little more than death squads. And we know that the CIA claims the authority to assassinate people it doesn't like. So when you have a couple of very bizarre deaths of enemies of the CIA in America within a few months of each other, you have to ask questions, and we've covered both these incidents on previous issues of RADTV, so I won't go into a lot of detail here. But ex-CIA asset and 9/11 skeptic author Phillip apparently shot his dog, his 2 children, and then himself. Now, some people are saying, well, you know, Americans do things like that. They're a violent lot, you know, he had an alcohol problem, blah, 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 character assassination. His neighbours say a very different story. They were interviewed by the investigative writer Wayne Masden, and they said they didn't hear anything, and they should have done because his house was quite near theirs. The significance of this is that the gun that he was using should have made a lot of noise, or the gun he was apparently using. According to the neighbours, it didn't. So you've got the death of the dog, you've got the death of the children, and you've got the death of Phillip Marshall, looking a bit like a professional hit with silencers. Could it have been the same guns? Well, we did some investigating with our sources at RADTV, and what we hear is that normally a silenced gun would be a different gun, and it would create different bullets and different forensics. But you can design silencers to fit onto the sort of gun that Phillip Marshall allegedly used. So the suggestion is that they came in and shot the dog, because dogs are always a problem if you're making trouble. If you're a burglar or an assassin, dogs bark and they don't stop barking. They can't be threatened, they just have to be killed, sadly. So they shot the dog, then went for the two children, and then went for Marshall himself. That's the allegation. Very little has come out about that since, and this happened early this year. But recently, the really big story, which is making the mainstream in America, is the journalist Michael Hastings. He worked for a website called BuzzFeed. It's a big growing website, you might want to take a look at it, and Rolling Stone magazine. He died in a car crash, but it was a single car crash. His car crashed into a tree at high speed, and nobody can quite understand how it would have happened. The ex-White House counter-terrorism expert Richard Clarke, who's been blowing the whistle on the CIA over 9/11, he went onto the media to say that it is possible to hack into car computers nowadays and take over the car, and it's possible that Michael Hastings' car was taken over by a computer, driven at full speed into the tree where it apparently exploded and he died. You can see pictures of this on the web, and there's a lot of debate around the rather poor quality photos of the car. Some people are saying that it doesn't show any damage, and some people are saying it doesn't even show the tree in the early photos. Well, predictably, the supporters of the official story are saying that that Michael Hastings was taking a lot of drugs, he had an amphetamine problem, but if he was, you know, he probably had been taking drugs for years. There's no real explanation why taking a lot of amphetamine would lead him to drive his car at full speed into a tree. So it doesn't really make any sense to a lot of people. He was a huge enemy of the CIA. He'd already got rid of General Stanley McChrystal by leaking emails of McChrystal's. US commander in Afghanistan. Basically, Michael Hastings got him sacked, and he was now moving on to John Brennan, the head of the CIA, and that's established now. Nobody debates that. And John Brennan, apparently, as well as being head of the CIA, was also in charge of a covert plan to persecute journalists who made trouble in America. So it's not too big a leap, some people are saying, to suggest that Michael Hastings was the victim of an assassination campaign. Now, you know, a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, here's another bit of evidence. Just take a look at John Brennan. Look at that guy. He looks like a thug to me. Of course, appearances don't count for much in today's world, but he's certainly a departure from the smoothie, PR-oriented type of CIA boss that we've seen in the past. There we have it. We'll bring you any further news about that. Another nasty bit of news, hopefully this won't happen, but in the UK the government is planning to more or less stifle dissent, and by hitting it not with anything obvious like, you know, censorship law, but by demanding that political campaigns that are processing any money, and of course what campaign doesn't process money on some scale or other, certainly a big campaign has to process quite a lot of money, they're demanding that political campaigns that process money should not be allowed to involve themselves in any way in election campaigns. So this means that, for instance, if you're the RSPCA, Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and you want to campaign against the badger cull, the mass killing of badgers, and there was one party that was supporting it and one party that wasn't, you wouldn't be allowed, it would become illegal under this proposed legislation for the RSPCA to tell its membership that the Conservatives, for the sake of argument, are supporting the badger cull. Shocking attack. It's supposed to be an attack on lobbyists, but it's actually an attack on political campaigns. And all the NGOs and non-governmental organisations in England are uniting against this backdoor attempt to safeguard the political parties, to effectively strengthen the stranglehold which the main three political parties already have on political life in the UK. But there's a lot of hope that this can be changed, and one of the organisations leading this campaign against this new legislation is 38 Degrees, a very effective internet campaigning organisation. You might want to check their website and consider whether to join that campaign or not. Fukushima, you may have seen this already in the mainstream, but it's worth recording it. It now turns out that it's even worse than anybody thought, or anybody in the mainstream thought. 3 meltdowns, hundreds and hundreds of gallons of highly radioactive water finding their way into the Pacific. Things in Fukushima, if anything, are getting worse rather than better. We're told by a source that everybody knew in the International Atomic Energy Authority, I've been told by a source there, that Japan was a huge risk for a nuclear meltdown and disaster. Because they won't admit, apparently Japanese are reluctant to admit or at least the Japanese establishment's reluctant to admit its shortcomings. So everybody knew it might happen. It happened. There was a big earthquake, predictable earthquake, and there were 3 meltdowns. If there is a humorous angle to this, you have to laugh at the BBC. Their recent headline says, "Fukushima leak is much worse than we were led to believe." Who led us to believe it wasn't bad? The BBC. They denied there were any meltdowns. That you can see them there at the time of Fukushima. They got experts who said there wasn't much wrong, not much to worry about, could be a lot worse, blah, blah, blah. So there's the BBC saying that they misled us, but of course they don't admit it was them that misled us. And here's a bit of good news. Cops with miniature cameras leads to fewer complaints and less violence. Police chief in Rialto, California might have hit on the way to reduce police violence. He's fitting cops with video cameras, so when you see one of their police, he's got a little video camera pointing at you. Some people might say that's an attack on civil liberties, but it certainly seems to have reduced the violence. 88% decline in the number of complaints, and following this, violence used 60% less often. The control group of police who didn't have them were much more prone to get involved in violent situations than the police who did have them. And it appears that it's good for the police as well, because some people make unfounded complaints against the police, and they're making less complaints. So you're getting less complaints against the police, less violence. It seems like modern technology can be used to possibly bring about a win-win situation. More developments in the political blackmail scandal. You'll recall that it came to light during the Jimmy Savile child molester scandal that the police in the UK have a special route for allegations against public figures and celebrities. That allegations are kept secret from the rest of the police and of course secret from the public, and they're channeled into a special branch of the police. Well, we discussed this in a previous clip, and we were saying that it's quite likely that that's how celebrities are kept in line, because that information is obviously hugely valuable to MI5 and the politicians who control MI5. So it appears that we now know in Britain how the blackmail system works. Well, in America, it's even clearer. And NSA whistleblower Russel Tice, and let's remember that Snowden isn't the only NSA whistleblower. He's part of a group of people who together are destroying the credibility of the Washington government and the NSA, the National security agency which does all the phone tapping in America. He told the website Boiling Frogs Blogspot, they went after, and I know this because I had my hands literally on the paperwork for these sort of things, they went after high-ranking military officers, they went after members of Congress, both Senate and House, especially on the intelligence committees and on the armed services committees. They went after judges. One of the judges they went after is now sitting on the Supreme Court. So that's possibly why these people are all supporting Obama and supporting a war, because they're blackmailed. Simple as, some would say. And now finally, right off the subject of politics, here's a couple of news from the health scene. Soil Association hits out at beauty brand greenwashing. You might have seen shampoo that calls itself organic, and you might have wondered what that means. Well, the law in England is, and I think in the rest of Europe and possibly in America, if it's not a food and it's not cotton or something that's covered by the organic regulations, if it's something like shampoo or soap or cars, anybody can call anything organic. And the Soil Association is saying that you shouldn't be allowed to use the word organic unless something is certified as organic, and a lot of people would say that makes absolute sense, especially for beauty products which might well be certified organic but in fact aren't. So there's a campaign that a lot of the organic people are getting behind. And now here's a brief report from Natural Products magazine, where the columnist Patrick Holford is a very eminent nutritionist, and he knows an awful lot about cancer. Now, we had a bit of a shot at Angelina Jolie a few shows ago, because she always seems to turn up like the angel of death in places where America's trying to create a feeling that there are human rights abuses going on, which should be met by their military, and particularly Damascus lately in the Syrian refugee camps. But of course we feel great sympathy and support for Angelina Jolie, who's discovered that she's apparently got an 85% chance of getting breast cancer due to having a genetic defect, a heritable genetic defect. Well, Patrick Holford points out that actually that's not quite right, but she possibly does have a 50% chance. But as women in general have a 13% chance of getting breast cancer, then actually her risk of getting cancer has only been elevated by about 30 or 40%. Nobody's saying she shouldn't decide what she wants about the mastectomy, but the point that Patrick Holford's making is that most cancer is not caused by genes, it's caused by what you eat and what your lifestyle is. It's very important to remember that cancer is not essentially a genetic disease. Even the evidence that it is comes from evidence of heritance. But that's not the same as genes, because a lot else gets inherited from your parents. You copy their lifestyles, you copy their emotional patterns, and so the idea that genes cause cancer is quite wrong, except in the very few types of cancer. And finally, here's some good news for the me generation. You remember the me generation? They're the people who only stop talking about me when they want to find out what you think about me. That's the old joke about the me generation. Well, now we've got a new device for them. You can have your coffee latte foam with your picture on. Yes, you can. And there's a camera in Japan, in Taiwan. The Taiwanese coffee chain Let's Cafe will personalize your coffees. They've got a machine, it will photograph you, and then it will sprinkle colored, edible, I'm not quite sure how edible, powder on your latte, and you will be able to look at a picture of yourself. It's not quite as good definition as you might have hoped for if you're a true member of the me generation. It might not have you smiling, but it is a picture of you on your latte that you can drink. So there's a bit of good news for the me generation. Thank you for watching RADTV. We'll be back with another show soon.